And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I understand we've only got the balance or so of an hour together, so I'll try and break the rule of a lifetime and be terse.
People of the world,
and I think I'll put it like this. It's true that publishers sometimes want to put a catchy or suggestive or challenging subtitle on a book. And so when we hit upon, or well, they hit upon, well, how religion poisons, and why religion poisons everything, I knew what would happen. People would come up to me, they'd say, you mean absolutely everything? You mean the whole thing? They would take me literally. I thought, well, all right. One of the things you have to do in life as an author is live up to your damn subtitle. So I thought today I'd defend the subtitle. Because I think the title probably, when it came to me in the shower, I realized pretty much does speak for itself. Unlike that sign outside Little Rock Airport, huge yellow and black sign that you see from the airport that says, just Jesus. A word I have used myself, and a name I know, but put like that seems to say both too much and too little. You know what I mean? Well, here's how religion has this effect, in my opinion. It is derived from the childhood of our species, from the bawling, fearful period of infancy. It comes from the time when we did not know that we lived on an orb. We thought we lived on a disc. When we did not know that we went round the sun, or that the sky was not a dome. When we didn't know that there was a germ theory to explain disease, and innumerable theories for the explanation of things like famine. It comes from a time when we had no good answers, but because we are pattern-seeking animals, a good thing about us, and because we will prefer even a conspiracy theory or a junk theory to no theory at all, a bad thing about us, this is and was our first attempt at philosophy, just as in some ways it was our first attempt at science. And it was all founded on, and remains founded on, a complete misapprehension about the origins, first of the universe, and second, about human nature. We now know a great deal about the origins of the universe, and a great deal about our own nature. I just had my DNA sequenced by National Geographic. You should all, by the way, get this done. It's incredibly important to find out how racism and creationism have been abolished by this extraordinary scientific breakthrough. How you can find out your kinship with all your fellow creatures originating in Africa, but also your kinship with other forms of life, including not just animal, but plant. And you get an idea of how you are part of nature, and how that's wonderful enough.
Starting right
and we know
here,
from Stephen Hawking and from many others,
because
Stephen Weinberg and many other great physicists, an enormous amount now about what Professor Weinberg's brilliant book calls the first 3 minutes, the concept of the Big Bang. And we can be as sure as we probably need be that neither this enormous explosion that set the universe in motion, which is still moving away from us at a great rate, nor this amazingly complex billion-year period of evolution. We can be pretty certain it was not designed so that you and I could be meeting in this room. We are not the objects of either of these plans. These plans don't know we're here. Sorry to say, wouldn't know or care if we stopped being here. We have to face this alone with the equipment, intellectual and moral, that we've been given, or that we've acquired, or that is innate to us. And here's another way in which religion poisons matters. It begins by saying, well, why don't we lie to ourselves instead? Why don't we pretend that we're not going to die? Or that an exception can be made at least in our own case.
Men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Why do we not pretend that the things like modern diseases, which we can sequence now, sequence the genes of, like AIDS, are the punishment for wickedness and fornication? Why don't we keep fooling ourselves that there is a divine superintendent of all this, because it would abolish the feeling of loneliness and possibly even of irrelevance that we might otherwise have. In other words, why don't we surrender to wish thinking? That poisons everything, in my opinion, right away. It attacks the very basic integrity that we need to conduct the scrupulous inquiries, investigations, experiments, interrogations of evidence that we need to survive and to prosper and to grow. And it's no coincidence, no accident, that almost every scientific advance has been made in the teeth of religious opposition of one form or another that says we shouldn't be tampering with God's design. I suppose the most recent and most dangerous one of these is the attempt to limit stem cell research. But everyone could probably think of other forms of scientific research and inquiry, especially medical, that had led to religious persecution in reprisal. Thirdly, it's an attack, I think, on what's also very important to us, our innate morality. If there's one point that I get made more than another to me when I go and debate religious people, it's this. They say,
and the gangs and the drugs,
where would your morals come from if there was no God? It's a question that's posed in Dostoevsky's wonderful novel, The Brothers Karamazov. One of the brothers says,
right here,
it's Smerdyakov, actually, the wicked one, says it.
Right now.
If God is dead, isn't everything permitted? Isn't everything permissible? Where would our ethics be if there was no superintending duty? This, again, seems to me a very profound insult to us in our very deepest
and their pain is our
and character. It is not the case, I submit to you, that we do not set about butchering and raping and thieving from each other right now, only because we're afraid of a divine punishment or because we're looking for a divine reward. It's an extraordinarily base and insulting thing to say to people. On my mother's side, some of my ancestry is Jewish. I don't happen to believe the story of Moses in Egypt or the exile or the wandering in the Sinai. And in fact, now even Israeli archaeology has shown that there isn't a word of truth to that story, or really any of the others. But take it to be true. Am I expected to believe that my mother's ancestors got all the way to Mount Sinai, quite a trek, under the impression until they got there that rape, murder, perjury, and theft were okay? Only to be told when they got to the foot of Mount Sinai, bad news, none of these things is kosher after all. They're all forbidden. No, I don't think so. I think we can actually have a better explanation in every sense. Superior, as well as better, that no one would have been able to get as far as Mount Sinai or in any other mountain in any other direction unless they had known that human solidarity demands that we look upon each other as brothers and sisters, and that we forbid activities such as murder, rape, perjury, and theft. That this is innate in us. Of those to whom it is not innate, the sociopaths who don't understand the needs of anyone but themselves, and the psychopaths who positively take pleasure in breaking these rules, well, all we can say is, according to one theory, they're also made in the image of God, which makes the image of God question rather problematic, does it not? Or that they can be explained by further and better research and have to be restrained and disciplined meanwhile. But in no sense here is religion a help where it tends to help most, which is to our morality, to ethics. Finally, I would say, not finally because I'm finished here. I'm not quite done. Don't relax. Everyone's got a drink, something to eat. But on the poison question, I think there's the real temptation of something very poisonous to human society and human relations, which is the fear of freedom.
It's going to be only
the wish to be told what to do.
First.
Now, just as we all like to think, and we live under written documents and proclamations that encourage us to think that it is our birthright and our most precious need to be free, to be liberated, to be untrammeled. So we also know that, unfortunately, the innate in people is the servile, is the wish to be told what to do, is the adoration for strong and brutal and cruel leaders. This other baser element of the human makeup has to be accounted for and gives us a great deal of trouble around the world as we speak. Religion, in my view, is a reification, a distillation of this wish to be a serf, to be a slave. Ask yourself if you really wish it was true that there was a celestial dictatorship that watched over you from the moment you were born, actually the moment you were conceived, all through life, night and day, knew your thoughts, waking and sleeping.
Winning again. Winning
could in fact
never
convict you of
before.
Thought crime, the absolute definition of a dictatorship.
We
can
will
convict
bring
you
back
for
our
what you
jobs.
think, or what you privately want.
We will bring back our borders.
That
we will bring back
like
our wealth.
Under permanent surveillance,
and we will
control,
bring back
and supervision,
our dreams.
and doesn't even let go of you when you're dead, because that's when the real fun begins. Now, my question is this. Who wishes that were true? Who wants to lead the life of a serf in a celestial North Korea? I've been to North Korea. I'm one of the very few writers who has. I'm indeed the only writer who's been to all three axis of evil countries, Iran,
rebuilding our country with American hands
North Korea
and American
is the most
labor.
religious state I've ever been to. I used to wonder when I was a kid, what would it be like praising God and thanking Him all day and all night? Well, now I know. Because North Korea is a completely worshipful state. It's set up only to do that, for adoration. And it's only one short of a trinity. They have a father and a son, as you know,
and
the dear leader and the great
nations
leader.
Of the world.
The father is still the president of the country. He's been dead for 15 years.
That it is the right of all nations
the Kim Jong-il, the little one, is only the head of the party and the army.
We do
His
not
father
seek to impose
is
our
still
way
the president,
of life on
head of the
anyone.
state. So you have in North Korea what you might call a necrocracy.
As an example,
or what I call a mausolocracy, or a thanatocracy. Just one short of a trinity. Father, Son, maybe no Holy Ghost, but they do say that when the birth of the younger one took place, the birds of Korea sang in Korea
Islamic terrorism.
This I've checked. It did not happen.
Eradicate completely from the face
Take my word
of the
for
earth.
Didn't occur. And I suppose I should add that they don't threaten to follow you after you're dead. You can leave North Korea. You can get out of their hell and their paradise by dying. Out of the Christian and Muslim one,
through our
you
loyalty
cannot.
to our country,
This
we
is the
will
wish to be a slave. I mean,
our
my view,
loyalty
it
to each
poisons, human relations.
When you open your heart to patriotism,
I've already babbled for nearly 20 minutes.
there
I'll be
is
quick.
no room for prejudice.
It is argued. Well, some religious people have done great things and have been motivated to do so by their faith. The most cited case in point I have found is that of Dr. Martin Luther King, who I know I don't need to explain to you about. Two quick things on that.
In unity.
First, he was its true minister.
Openly,
he did preach the book of Exodus, the exile of an enslaved and oppressed people, as his metaphor. But if he really meant it, he would have said that the oppressed people, as the book of Exodus finds them doing, were entitled to kill anyone who stood in their way, and take their land and their property, enslave their women, kill their children,
there should be no fear.
Commit genocide,
we are protected,
rape,
and we
ethnic
will
cleansing,
always be
and
protected.
Forcible
we will
theft
be
of land.
protected
That's what
by the great men and women
the
of
book
our
Exodus describes
military
happening.
and law
The
enforcement.
full destruction of other tribes. It's very
And
fortunate that Dr. King
importantly,
only meant the Bible at the most to be
we
used as a
will
metaphor.
be
And after all, he
protected
was
by
using
God.
the only book that he could be sure all of his audience had ever really read. That's the first thing. The second is, during his lifetime, he was attacked all the time
we must think
for having
big
too many secular
and
leftist and non-believing friends.
In America,
people like
we understand
famous black
that a
secularists
nation
like Bayard Rustin,
is only living as
Philip Randolph and
long
others,
as
the men who
it
actually did
is
organize the
striving.
march on
We will no
Washington,
longer
which leads me to
accept
my third observation,
politicians
which is this.
who are all
It's a
talk
challenge I've
and no
made now in
action,
debates with rabbis,
constantly complaining,
with
but
priests
never
of all
doing
Christian stripes,
anything
with
about
imams. Once with I know this sounds like the opening of a joke about some bar, but once also with a Buddhist nun. In Miami, I asked them all. Here's my challenge. You have to name me an ethical statement that was made, or a moral action that was performed by a religious person in the name of faith that could not have been made as an action, or uttered as a statement by
you that it cannot
a person
be done.
not of faith.
No challenge can match the heart and fight and spirit
so
of
far,
America.
I've done it
We
quite a
will
high
not
level with them.
fail.
There's no takers.
Our country
no one's
will
been able to find
thrive
me
and
that.
prosper again.
That being the case, we're entitled to say, I think, that religious faith is surplus to requirements. Whereas, if I was to ask anyone in this room, think of a wicked thing said, or an evil thing done by a person of faith in the name of faith, no one would have a second of hesitation in thinking of what will
tomorrow.
Interesting to realize how true that is, and how much truer it's getting. Does anyone ever listen to Dennis Prager's show?
It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never
Christian
forget.
broadcaster.
That whether we are
religious
black
broadcaster, I should say. He's not
or brown
he's more Jewish than Christian.
or
Judeo-Christian
white,
broadcaster.
we all
Quite often
believe
Brother
the
generously
same
has me on
red
his show. He
blood
asked
of
me a
patriots.
question the other day. He had a challenge of his own. He said, you're to imagine that you're in a town late at night where you've never been before and you have no friends and it's getting dark.
The same glorious
and through the
freedoms,
darkness you see coming towards you a group of men, let's say
American
10.
flag.
Do you feel better or worse if you know that they're just coming from a prayer meeting?
And whether a child is born in the urban sprawl of
this
Detroit,
is Mr. Prager's question to me. I said, well, Mr.
plains of
Prager,
Nebraska,
without leaving you from
without
putting the letter B, I can tell you I've had that
fill their
experience
heart
in
with the same
Belfast,
dreams, and they
in Beirut,
are infused
in
with
Baghdad,
the breath of life
in Bombay,
by the same
in Bosnia, and in
Almighty
Bethlehem.
Creator.
And if you see anyone coming from a religious gathering in any of those places, you know exactly how fast you need to run.
So to all Americans in every city near
and no
far,
one has to explain to you why, and I
large,
haven't had to waste any time telling you how,
mountain,
ladies and gentlemen.
From ocean
So I submit to you that it is those who are
these
people of faith who have the explaining to do,
You will never
who have the justifying to do with if this
again.
is indeed the case. If they can't account for anything about the origin of our cosmos or our species,
Your voice,
if they say that
your
without
hopes,
them
and your
we'd
dreams
be
will define
without morals
our
and make us seem as if we're
American
merely
destiny.
animals without faith.
And your courage,
If further,
and goodness, and love
everybody
will forever
can
guide
name an
us
instance where
along
religion
the
has
way.
made people actually behave
Together,
worse to one another
we will
and
make
act as a
America strong
retardant
again.
upon the advances
We
of
will
knowledge
make
and science
America
and
wealthy
information.
again.
I submit that the
We
case
will
to be
make
made
America
is theirs
proud again.
rather than
We
mine.
will
And we have a
make
better
America
tradition. We're not
safe
just
again.
arid
And yes,
secularists
together,
and materialists. We on the
will
atheist
make
side.
America
We
great
can point
again.
through
Thank
Hubble
you.
telescope
God bless you.
fantastic,
And God
awe-inspiring,
bless America.
majestic pictures that are being taken now of the outer limits
Thank you.
of our universe.
God
And
bless
who's going
America.
to turn away from those pictures and start gaping again at the burning bush? We have smaller microscopes that can examine for us the miracles of the interior and the double helix and the sheer beauty of that. The natural world is wonderful enough, more wonderful than anything conjured by the fools who believe in astrology or the supernatural. And we have a better tradition politically. Against the popes and the imams and the witch doctors and the divine right of kings and the whole long tradition of civic repression combined with religion is known as theocracy. We have created in the United States the only country in the history of the world written on founding documents, testable, organized, works in progress, based on the theory of human liberation, and the only constitution in the history of the world that says that there shall be a separation between the church and the state. God is never mentioned in the United States Constitution, except in order to limit religion and keep it out of politics and put it under legal control. This achievement was described by President Jefferson, whose biographer I am in a small way, to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, in a letter after they'd written to him for fear of persecution. By the way, who do you think the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut were afraid of being persecuted by?
I did it.
Anyone knows?
The party that had the
No, the Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut. People forget what it used to be like. See how the Christians loved each other. How they tried to repeat the European pattern of one religious sect repressing and torturing another one. And as you probably know, the President wrote back and said, no, you may be assured that there will ever be in this country a wall of separation between the church and the state. So I have a new slogan, and I'm taking it on tour. And I invite you to join me in it. And it goes like this: Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
The general election earlier this year is that 40 years later, for too many people in our country, that dream feels distant.
And I'm all yours. And that was 25 minutes. I hope that's fair.
Is in question.
And I'll point to questions if you like, because I don't think anyone thinks that I've planted my immediate family in this hall. But Carol, stay out of it.
Now, I called that election. And I
Bring it
know
on.
that all of you in this hall, your friends and your families, worked day and night to secure the right result.
Thank you for coming to Google.
This is my honor.
You make it sound really, really simple. I mean, you have explanations for everything. And I agree with a lot of your arguments. And, you know, I lived in, you know, like a socialist country. I mean, I come from Croatia, so I empathize with a little bit of when you say like the axis of evil, and especially North Korea being a perfect theocracy. I can relate to that. But I don't understand why do you say that these people really want to be enslaved? If you could explain this to me. I mean, I think there's really a system, you know, like set up by a minority, which which is really a brutal system. And I don't understand that part of, like, this is something that these people want. So.
Did you say you were Croatian? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, then I would be upset if you thought I meant that these man-made regimes were there because people wanted them to be. No. That's not what I meant at all about North Korea, particularly. These have been riveted onto people. I mean, North Korea is a hermetic place, unfortunately, in that it has ocean on either side of it, the demilitarized zone, which is several miles wide on the south, and Russia and China on the north. So you have a place where you can horribly conduct an experiment on human beings, essentially. You can isolate them totally. The North Korean state was set up in the same year that Orwell published 1984. And you almost think that somebody gave Kim Il-sung a copy of 1984 in Korean and said, do you think we could make this fly? And he said, well, I can't be sure, but we sure can give it the old college try. Because that's how it feels there. I went there, I thought, I've had this experience, I'll just digress for a second. I've had this experience twice in my life. Journalists hate cliché. I know it doesn't always seem like that when you read the papers, but we try and avoid them. I went to Prague once under the old days of the communist regime. I thought, whatever happens to me here, I'm not going to mention Franz Kafka in my essay. I'm going to be the first journalist not to do it. I went to a meeting of the opposition underground. Somebody betrayed us. Because the secret police came in suddenly, wham, like this, broke down the door, dogs, torches, rubber truncheons, the lot, slam me against the wall. You're under arrest. I demand to see the British ambassador, blah, blah. You're under arrest. What's the charge? We don't have to tell you that. I thought, fuck, I've got to mention Kafka after all. They make you do it. Well, that's actually what a cliche is. Communism is a cliche in itself. Same in North Korea. I thought, I don't want to mention Orwell, I don't want to mention Orwell, now I have to mention him. There's no other standard of comparison. No, what I meant about the fear of freedom was this. Many people don't, of course, want to live under a hellish starvation regime of gulag type, like that. But they quite like being told what to do. And they don't want to be told that world doesn't owe them a living, and that they're on their own, and they quite like it, and repeatedly vote for parties and sometimes leaders who promise to provide everything, as long as they'll give up just a little bit of freedom. Just a little bit. And the trade-off, you'll get more security, more welfare. It's a temptation. In some cases, it takes an extreme form. And I'm very impressed by how often when I debate with religious people, they will tell me that they gravitate towards faith because they want someone to, if you like, look after them.
And that's why
the whole idea of a heavenly Father, for example, is built up in this.
And it's why today
the old joke says, some say God is dead, some say God is dead. You figure. Then there are people who, Islam, for example, the word Islam means surrender, prostration. You give everything to God. Everything's in His hands. This is implicitly totalitarian. That's what I mean. But I think it's innate in most people, is the feeling that they quite like someone to take care of them all the time. So it can be hard to argue with them that there is no such person.
I understand better now, but
our challenge was to repair
just to follow up a little bit. So, is there a possibility there to say that then some people are more freedom-loving than others, and is this some sort of I wouldn't call it racism, but like differentiating people by their love towards freedom? And
no, I'm certain that the same feelings are innate in all people, and that one day there will be a North Korean edition of 1984, and it'll be a huge bestseller. I'm as sure of that as I can be of anything, though. At the moment, it's hard to imagine that there's anyone in North Korea who's even allowed to consider the concept of political liberty. It will come because it is innate. I've no doubt about that.
To follow up on this fear of freedom and this innate idea, sorry to beat a dead horse, but what do you think would possibly replace this? I also think that there's it's obviously much easier to say my life is out of my control or these events are out of my control. So, I'm going to thank God for the good things and, hate the devil for the bad things, whatever. So, from Plato to Nietzsche to Socrates, or to Sartre have said, it's difficult to choose the life where you're actually deciding and making choices for yourself and taking responsibility and appreciating the fact that the world doesn't care about your existence and doing what you need to do with that. It is difficult. How do we, how could we possibly imagine a world where everybody buys into that idea, and where would we go, where would that structure that some people feel they can't do without, where would they get that from? I guess what would religion be replaced by to fulfill this natural need?
Yeah. Well, I would say that emancipating oneself from religion and from the combined sort of solipsism and masochism, which is what I was trying to say to the comrade here from a moment ago. Religion says to you, remember, the monotheistic ones, you're a miserable sinner. Your sin is original. You can't escape it. You're born as a wretch. You're made out of dust, or according to the Quran, a clot of blood. You're a worm. You're nothing, but a piece of gunk, basically. And you've got to work really hard to get away from the terrible punishment that awaits you for that. So, total abnegation. But there's also good news. The universe is designed with you in mind. And God has a plan for you personally. So just when the person thinks they can't take any more abuse, it's like being inducted into a cult. Just when the person thinks they can't take any more humiliation, they're told, but Father loves you. He wants you to join our group. It's not good for people. You'd be better off without it. So would everyone you know. So it's not a matter of what would we put in its place. We wouldn't. We'd be emancipated from that kind of sadomasochism. That's a good thing to start off with. Second, we have the wonders and beauties of science to study. We have, instead of ancient texts that are full of lies and myths, we have increasingly a wonderful world literature that's available to anybody who can read even little. Most recently, I would just cite it because yesterday was the birthday of India. Happy birthday, by the way, to all Indians here. And Pakistanis, if you insist, though, I think partition was a huge mistake. And religious partition is the worst kind. It's going to lead one day to a thermonuclear war, so I didn't have time to go into that, but maybe someone will ask me. There's an incredible literature in English written by Indians, a sort of sub-branch. I shouldn't even say sub, I mean a branch, a new branch of English writing by Indians in English that's becoming a great part of world literature. There's all this extraordinary excitement. And people say, no, you should, as Thomas Aquinas said, I'm a man of one book, you should be reading your Bible. You don't really need anything else. They're destroying libraries in the Muslim world that could have any books that contradict the Quran. This isn't their way to live. But having said all that, and said what the consolations of philosophy too, which aren't that hard to study, and are very rewarding, and ethical and moral dilemmas that you get out of the study of literature, George Eliot, Dostoevsky, people of that kind, James Joyce. Still, it's only a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. There are no guarantees, and an atheist can be a nihilist, or a sadist, or a Stalinist, or a fascist. That'd be unlikely, the last one, but it's possible. Okay, but there are no guarantees, and in part, it's the recognition of that's the beginning of wisdom, as well as, I think, the beginning of liberty.
That's what I'm in this for.
One short one and one longer one. I just wanted to be sure. I assume that you have read Captain Stormfield's Journey to Heaven by Mark Twain.
On the long road.
Sorry. Yes, I've read a lot of Mr. Clements on religion.
Yes, that seemed to be sort of a definitive work on the hierarchy structure of most standard religion.
Yes, by the way, you can't read too much Twain, ladies and gentlemen, on this subject. And now, all of his stuff is available. There are websites on Mark Twain and religion. It used to be really hard to get his writings on religion even 10 years ago. Sorry.
And my longer question, which hopefully won't choke you up, I actually have several friends who are very well educated, in some cases in the sciences, who became religious late in life. They had been atheist or agnostic, and then decided that they were feeling something and became religious. Do you have anything to say on that sort of grounds, or why that might be occurring?
And the number of black people being stopped in search has fallen.
Yes, I suppose I could speculate, but that's all I would be doing.
Of course.
I mean, I think for some people the Hubble view, say, does have the opposite effect from the one it has on me. It makes people feel, well, then whoever designed this must be even more amazing than I thought. And there are attempts made by creationists now to say that. Instead of saying, no, Darwin was wrong, God made all this stuff, they now say, well, okay, there was evolution, but God did that too. So, as you may know, arguments that explain everything explain nothing. That's a definite principle, I think, of underlying all cognition. If they can bend their argument so it can comprehend everything, comprise everything, then it isn't an argument. But I think that we are certainly made in such a way as to be worshipfully inclined, shall we say. That tendency is certainly within us. And when people think that there's something awe-inspiring, what they feel is awe. And then what they feel is, well, maybe there's some majesty I should be acknowledging here. Though that isn't at all a logical step. By the way, do you know about awe?
In what sense?
John Wayne played the Roman centurion in one of the films about the crucifixion.
We already know, for example,
and at a certain point they said the rain has to come down hard and there's thunder and lightning and the veil of the temple splits and so on. And John Wayne, standing as a centurion, is supposed to say, truly this was the Son of God. So he does this. Forget who the director was. I think it's Houston. And cue rain, thunder, lightning, so Wayne stands there stoically under the waters. Truly this was the Son of God. And the rest says, John, that was great, that was terrific. I just wonder if we could have it with a little more awe. So they cue again the rain, thunder, veil of the temple splits in twain, earthquakes, it's all happening, and Wayne says, truly this was the Son of God.
So this is a kind of a follow-up on Tom's question. I have a buddy who styles himself as a kind of an allegorical pagan, and he's had a lot of angry criticisms of religion, many of which echo yours. But at the same time, he feels in himself a kind of a biological need to be part of a circle of believers in a community, which he feels helps his rather fragile emotional demeanor. He goes through depression and things like that, and he finds that belief. So what he's done is try to find what he feels is the least obnoxious religion he can find, and then not take it too seriously. What would you say to such a person?
Well, that used to be called the Church of England. Or the Unitarians, about whom Bertrand Russell said the great thing about them is they believe in one God maximum. Peter de Vries is very good on this. He says people used to be pagans and polytheists and believe in multiple gods, and then they started believing in one God, and they're getting nearer the true figure all the time. This is progress.
An advocate to act on behalf of bereaved families, to support them
with public inquests. In an article, I believe it was in Slate, that I read, you seemed reluctant to endorse, if not critical, of Richard Dawkins' attempt to sort of organize atheists under the title of Brights.
Yes.
And I believe that your comment was that we infidels need no such machinery of reinforcement.
So we are building on our record of giving
my question is, if like-minded people do not organize, especially if those whose ideals we oppose are more organized, how can we attempt to kind of steer our society the way that we would like it to go?
Well, I was thinking of saying this to the previous question. I mean, I'm in some ways the wrong person to ask these questions because I'm no longer a joiner up of groups. I don't feel the belonging need anymore. I used to when I was younger and more left than I am now. Feel the need to be involved in an organized way. Now I don't, and I think I probably have more influence as an individual than I ever did as a cogwheel in a so-called party. A point for anyone to ponder, actually, who's asked, have they ever considered registering independent, for example? People may fight harder for your vote if you don't give it away in advance. Separate question. And it's very important to me that I don't belong to a church. People who believe as I believe don't need to get together all the time and remind ourselves what we believe, reinforce it, ram it home in case we forget the incredible propositions that we're singing and all this kind of thing.
That's what I'm in
you just recognize a fellow free thinker when you meet one. That should be enough, and in any country or any language as well.
To fight for this mainstream conservative agenda.
To
win the battle of
there will be
ideas
in Washington in October a big gathering where Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and Ayaan Hirsi Ali and myself and many others are going to be. Victor Stenger, because there has been an extraordinary vogue of successful books on this subject now, and I think there's a change in the zeitgeist going on about religion. And let me just say this, if that zeitgeist has been brought about, if a change has been brought about in that zeitgeist, it hasn't been by any organization. It's been by a group of like-minded people writing their hearts out and refusing to be intimidated by religious bullying, or to allow religious nonsense to be taught in the schools, for example, in place of science, or to allow euphemisms to be spread about the behavior of the parties of God in Iraq or elsewhere. That's what's created it, not an organization, but what you might call an intellectual tendency. I think that's fine. I think it's encouraging.
Of free and open markets.
Right. A few of the things that you said don't really seem consistent with our experience in the United States. Two things in particular. One is that you said, once people have Hubble telescopes and microscopes, the burning bush is not as interesting. And the other thing you said is that religion kind of feeds into innate human nature for being told what to do or not having as much freedom. Well, in the United States, you have the most advanced, wealthy, most powerful nation in probably the history of the world. And you have probably the most freedom-loving, almost inventing, not inventing, but like really espousing the philosophy of freedom and individuality and trying to, propagate that throughout the world. Yet you also have the most religious nation. No, it's true. I mean, you can argue with the methods, but I mean, there's no question that we were trying to promote democracy. And yet you have the most religious nation. You have people going to church is probably at an all-time high. Religious people affect who our leaders are, to a great degree. So how do you explain that contradiction?
Well, I don't think it's a contradiction because the secular constitution means you can have religious pluralism. Now, for example, where I come from originally, you can probably tell I was born in England. The head of the church is the head of the state and the head of the armed forces. It's an official church, and you have to pay for it, and whether you want to or not. And on the moment that Her Majesty the Queen expires, the head of the Church of England will become a bat-eared half-Muslim with no taste in women, as far as I'm concerned. The lugubrious Prince Charles, who goes to classes on Islam and talks to plants and is a lewd. That's what you get for founding a church on the family values of Henry VIII. In the United States, you can't have any of that. That'd be completely unconstitutional. You can belong to any church you want, and the government has nothing to do with it. And people, I think, take a Tocquevillian view, if you like, of the church. They go, many of them, to church for social reasons, some of them for ethnic ones, some of them for charitable, some of them for community reasons, as you might say. If you ask someone, now I've been doing this a lot recently, I have debated at every stop of my book tour. Okay, so you said you were a Baptist minister, yes. Well, do you believe in John Calvin's teaching on predestination and hellfire? Why do you want to know? Well, only because you said you were a Baptist. Yeah, but I mean, I'm a Southern Baptist. And that kind of, well, come on. They don't love the question. They ask Catholics if they really believe what their church teaches or what they test. And of course they don't. The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists. By far the fastest growing, doubled in the last 2 years. But people are evidently lying to the opinion polls. There aren't enough churches in the country, and there are plenty of them. There are not enough to take all the people who say they go to them. Just couldn't be done. Couldn't fit them in. I don't think people who have doubts about religion are going to turn them into opinion polls as a call up at dinner time. They will say, yes, I am a Methodist.
Shall we,
I sometimes wonder, John Wesley is really the man. Not when the multiple choice test.
Aí, Professor Chomsky. Welcome, Mr. Chomsky. It's an honor for me to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be with you.
Tell me, after 6 months of the Trump government, it's possible to say what about Trump, the administration, the Trump administration?
Well, there's, on the one hand, Trump, on the other hand, the administration.
I was about to talk about somebody I'd like to give a P45 to, and that's Jeremy Corbyn.
Trump is basically a son. He wants to make sure that every day he's right at the top of the television news.
And we don't need to talk about Corbyn's past, we can talk about his
headlines are about him.
Because this
and
is
that
a
means doing one
to
strange performance after another. That's the only way to keep the television cameras focused on him. And it works. If you look over the past 6 months, every day, turn on BBC, look at the New York Times, that's the
Twitter.
That's what it starts with.
But his administration,
administration is something else. You have to look at people like Paul Ryan, who was Svengali behind the administration. He's there. He represents the most savage wing of the traditional Republican Party, the wing that's deeply dedicated to providing support for private power, corporate power, and everything else can be dismissed. In fact, if you look at his actual proposals for the budget, they essentially eliminate the federal budget, except for the military and support for private wealth and corporate power. And step by step, that's what they're doing. They take a look every day, usually by stealth, something is happening. So, for example, while all attention was focused on the Twitters about transgenders in the military, his Secretary of Commerce quietly enacted rules which will pretty much destroy the fishing industry in the Atlantic coast, eliminating the regulations that have been controlling the level of fishing to prevent overfishing.
The agenda of the government is Paul Ryan's.
It's Ryan, McConnell. It's a kind of a winged and extremist, rather savage wing of the Republicans.
Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon is, nobody knows just what he's doing. He's a figure in the background, maybe Rasputin, if you want an analogy, who's got it. He has his own picture, very clear. He's explicit. He wants a white Christian America, and nothing else belongs. He and, in fact, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, agree on this. And they're acting in the background in one or another way. But if you look at the cabinet, it's Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, the most conservative, reactionary elements of the Republican Party. Actually, what's going on with the health bill is very instructive. Every proposal that's coming from the Republicans, as soon as it's analyzed by the Congressional Budget Office, turns out it's eliminating health care for 20 or 30 million people. The U.S. system is already, the health system is a scandal. It's about twice the per capita cost of other comparable countries and relatively poor outcomes. The Obama changes improved it somewhat, but for 7 years the Republicans have had one prime commitment on their agenda: destroy that. Partly because Obama initiated it, and they have to eliminate Obama.
And in terms of foreign policy, what can you say about Trump, the Trump foreign policy?
Well, actually, in some aspects of foreign policy, I think his position is somewhat more sensible, whatever the reasons are for it. He has made efforts to try to reduce tensions with Russia, which makes very good sense. The threat of accidental war on the Russian border is very high. Any serious strategic analyst is terrified by the prospects. And while Congress, including the Democrats, is acting to increase the tensions, Trump seems to be trying to control and limit them, whatever his reasons may be. It's very hard to figure out his reasons.
But speculate a bit for us. Do you think that why this appeasement with Russia, with Putin?
Probably because he admires a strong authoritarian leader, maybe business interest. But whatever the reasons, reducing the tensions does make sense. In the case of other areas, take say, we're regularly informed daily that the major threat that we face is North Korea.
And the tensions are growing up there.
And the tensions are developing. Now, there happens to be a very simple way of approaching the North Korean dilemma, namely accept the North Korean offer to do exactly what we're asking them to do. We're demanding that they freeze their nuclear weapons and missile programs, and that's exactly what they've offered. China and North Korea have proposed that. In fact, they did 2 years ago under Obama. It was rejected then, it's rejected now. And the reason it's rejected is because there's a quid pro quo that the United States call off threatening military maneuvers right at the North Korean border. Trump, for example, has even escalated that by sending nuclear-capable B-52s to fly right at the border, ships near the border and so on. North Korea may be the worst regime in the world, but they want to. The regime wants to survive. Okay? So one perfectly sensible possibility would be to accept the Chinese-North Korean offer for freezing their programs and move on towards negotiations which might carry things forward. And they might succeed. If you look at the record, the actual record, it does show that whatever one thinks about the regime, they play a kind of tit-for-tat game. If you offer them something, they give something back.
You are a critic of Obama. It's possible to compare the Obama administration, 8 years, with the 6 months of Trump?
The 6 months of Trump are a real horror story. Domestically, it's just tearing to shreds every constructive element in social and economic policy. I mean, they're cutting back of, the worst element, the most dangerous element, is his position on climate. And that's not Trump. That's the Paris Conference. That's the Republican Party. Take a look at the primaries last year. Every single candidate, without exception, either denied that what is happening, or said, maybe it is, but we shouldn't do anything about it. In fact, the Paris negotiations, which you mentioned, were aimed at a verifiable treaty, but they couldn't reach it because the Republican Congress wouldn't accept it. Trump is an extreme example of Republican denialism, and this is a matter of survival of the species.
Today, what's most danger? The climate catastrophe or the nuclear weapons?
Both. They're different in character. The climate catastrophe is coming unless we do something about it. Nuclear war is a threat that we've been living with for 70 years. And if you look at the record, which is shocking, there has been case after case of very close approach to disaster. There is very significant information that, unfortunately, the media are simply not reporting. So, for example, in March, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the main scientific journal dealing with strategic nuclear weapons, had an extremely important article in which some of the leading specialists on the topic analyzed the modernization programs that Obama instituted and that Trump is carrying forward. And what they showed is that the kill capacity has increased enormously to the point where there is now a first strike capacity, which would wipe out the Russian deterrent. And as they point out, this erodes the very slender thread on which stability has hung for many years. It means that, as they put it, this is the kind of program that would be carried out by a state aiming at a first strike, which will eliminate any retaliation. The Russians, of course, understand that. This is extremely dangerous.
Nós vamos fazer pequeno intervalo e já voltamos com o professor Noam Chomsky. Voltamos com o professor Noam Chomsky, linguista e ativista político americano. Professor Chomsky, tell me, do you think that there is a decadence of the American empire in the world, his power?
That's a little misleading. The American empire hit its peak of power in 1945. At that point, the United States had probably about half of the wealth of the world, total security, controlled the hemisphere, the oceans, the opposite sides of the oceans. Other industrial powers had been seriously harmed or virtually destroyed. The U.S. economy boomed during the war. Manufacturing quadrupled. It was laid the basis for enormous post-war expansion. That was the peak of American power. It started to decline almost immediately. The first significant decline was in 1949.
China.
When what is called, interestingly, the loss of China, a very interesting and revealing phrase, and that's the basis for McCarthyism and who was responsible for the loss of China and so on. And gradually the world began to recover from wartime disaster. Decolonization proceeded in its agonizing way. The world got more diverse. If you reach, say, 1970, the world was economically tripolar. There was a North American base of power based in the United States, European base centered in Germany, East Asian base at that time centered in Japan, now including the East Asian tigers in China, and the U.S. wealth was maybe 20% of the world. That's still enormous, but not 50%. Of course, U.S. And since then, it's kind of stabilized. This is misleading, however, in several ways.
Why?
Well, one reason is that the traditional measure of national economic power is in terms of what are called national accounts, like gross domestic product. But the way the world has changed in the last 20 years, that's no longer a very accurate measure. If you look at the world economy from a different point of view, who owns the world? Turns out that U.S. corporations, multinationals, own about 50% of the world economy. Now that's not U.S. power, but it's corporate power based in the U.S. Furthermore, if you look at the military dimension, the U.S. nobody's even close.
What do you think is the place of Latin America, of Brazil, in this world?
That's a choice that Latin America has to make. If you go back a century, 1920s, you read the Wall Street Journal, they were describing Brazil as the potential Colossus of the South, comparable to the Colossus of the North. Had huge resources, faced no real external dangers, politically sophisticated, educated populations, every reason for it to become, especially Brazil, but all of Latin America, another center of power in the world. It hasn't happened. In fact, the one time it really began to happen was during Lula's government, when, along with his very competent foreign secretaries, Cesar Amorim, the Lula government was able to turn Brazil into one of the significant actors on the world stage. But it simply has not been sustainable.
Why?
In fact, it's very striking to see why. It's interesting, for example, to compare, say, East Asia with Latin America, say Brazil with South Korea. If you go back, say, to 1960, South Korea was at the level of a poor African country. Take a look at Brazil was much richer per capita. It's highly unequal in Brazil, but overall the average per capita income was much higher. The next 20 years, 1960 to 1980, both countries had a substantial growth rate, pretty comparable, and then it stops. South Korea continues to grow and develop, becomes a major industrial power. Brazil went through the famous 2 lost decades. But by now, Brazilian per capita income is, I think, a quarter or half of South Korea's. And this is across the board, Latin America and East Asia. If you ask why, I think there has been good analysis of it. Latin America has never controlled its elites. The wealthy sectors basically have no responsibility to the country. They do what they want. They export capital, they import luxury goods. The East Asia is quite different. They're under control.
But why the left populism in Latin America did not work at the end? Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, even Bolivia. Why this end, melancholic end?
I don't think it's an end. I think it's a period of regression. But there are a lot of achievements which I think will remain. So take Brazil. Lots of things were wrong, but many things were good. So there was a sharp decrease in poverty, improvement in educational standards.
But they lost the power, and there is a regression now.
There's a regression, but I suspect it will come back. I don't think this has happened over and over. The fundamental reason is the failure of Latin American societies to control the concentrations of wealth and capital and elite power, and to deal with the radical problem of inequality. The Latin American countries have ample resources. They're in a much better position to develop than East Asia. No enemies. However, the policies that have been pursued have been quite different. So in East Asia, for example, South Korea, Taiwan, they followed the Japanese model. They welcomed investment, but it was targeted. It was used under careful planning for development. At the same time, Latin America was importing capital, but luxury goods, not capital goods, and not targeting them.
Do you think that corruption is the main problem in Latin America or not?
It's a problem, a serious problem, but it's a problem everywhere.
Everywhere. Even in Spain.
Even in the United States, it's dramatic. Depends what we call corruption. Like take Apple Computers, the biggest company in the world. They succeed in barely paying any taxes. But we don't call it corruption. What it amounts to is establishing an office in Ireland and saying that's the company, or putting in the 1990s, just as an illustration, there was a period, you may recall, of great enthusiasm about emerging markets and how wonderful it was to invest in emerging markets, in Latin America in particular. So, out of curiosity, I subscribed to the Department of Commerce regular reports. They give detailed reports of every economic statistic you can imagine. One of them is foreign direct investment in the Western Hemisphere, excluding Canada, which is part of Europe. And it was very interesting. It turned out about 25% of it went to Bermuda, 15% went to the British Caribbean islands, 10% went to Panama. That wasn't to build steel mills.
We don't
call it corruption. And that's a huge amount of money.
One last question, Mr. Chomsky. After so many years, you are 88 years old, a young man. Do you think that the human species are getting better? That we are happier today than in the past?
That's not.
Happier is hard to judge, but I think there have been advances. So, for example, 50% of the world's population are women. There have been great advances in women's rights. The civil rights generally, there's been a substantial improvement. There's now serious concern for the very significant threat of environmental catastrophe. 50 years ago, there was nothing. There's much more opposition, and take the United States. Opposition to aggression is far higher than it was in the past. The United States could not possibly do something like the invasion of Indochina, the worst crime since the Second World War. That's out of the question. Lots of things to criticize, some of them pretty awful, but there's a general slow improvement with periods of regression.
You are an optimist, so.
And as Prime Minister, I would that's something
the choices are to be an optimist and to do what you can to make things better, or to be a pessimist and ensure that the worst will happen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Chomsky. I'm an admirer. I study your work as linguist and I admire your intellectually. Nós ficamos por aqui e voltamos na próxima quinta-feira, depois de termos a honra de termos recebido o professor Noam Chomsky. Até lá.
That's what we will do. This then is the great number of changes. Not the great number of changes, the global movement stands to
Thank you so much. Well, it's wonderful to be here. It's been a great pleasure to get a chance to meet so many. Are you getting feedback here? It's been a great pleasure to meet so many of you in the audience. I don't often get a chance to do that. And needless to say, it's a great honor to share the stage with Dan and Richard and Ayan and Lawrence and so many other exceptional people. I'd like to take a moment, as many people have, to just acknowledge the void that is left by the death of our friend Hitch. While it might be possible to guess what he would have thought about a number of the topics raised here, it's almost impossible to imagine how well he would have expressed those thoughts. The man had more wit and style and substance than a few civilizations I could name. So there's nothing to do but just take another moment to miss him.
Owned their own home. Today it is
I actually want to talk today about death. In fact, I had planned to speak about free will. I've written a book on the subject, and I dedicated it to Hitch, in fact. But it occurred to me that many of you may have already seen this book or watched a YouTube video of a lecture I gave on it that has hit the net about a week ago. So I decided to, and I would recommend that you do one of those two things, because I think free will is an important subject, and I think people are powerfully confused about it, and I think this confusion actually matters. But I've decided to change course and talk about death, which might be the only subject that people find more depressing than the idea that they don't have free will. So my apparent aim is to depress you. Through no free will of my own, I might add that. But I hope to build you back up over the course of the hour. Now, the reality of death
to renewing the British
is absolutely central to religion, and its denial is central to religion. And without death, faith-based religion would be unthinkable.
We simply haven't built enough.
And from the point of view of the faithful,
as a result, prices have risen so much that the
atheism appears to be the mere assertion of death. We actually appear to be a death cult, because we're the only people who admit that death is real.
Now, we have begun to put this right. The number of new homes
most
delivered each
views,
year
every other view, either leaves the question open or asserts that death is an illusion, and that the good people or the people who believe the right things about an Iron Age war god get everything they want after they die, and that everything that seems to be anomalous or undesirable or merely accidental in this life gets sorted out in the end. Now, a convention like this is really just an open declaration that there's no reasonable likelihood of any of that happening.
Schemes like Help to Buy to support
the good news of atheism, the gospel of atheism, is essentially nothing. That nothing happens after death. There's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to fear. When after you die, you are returned to that nothingness that you were before you were born. Now, this proposition is very difficult to understand, and most people seem to mistake nothing for something. Many have said that my friend Lawrence Krauss does that. But in the case of death, people seem to think that they imagine something like an eternity of silent darkness, which does sound just a little boring. But if we are right and nothing happens after death, then every religion ever devised is false. But if we are right and nothing happens after death, death, therefore, is not a problem.
We will encourage councils
life is the problem.
To bid for this money and provide certainty.
But the problem is that without God and without a promise of an eternal existence after death, life appears to be an emergency.
Getting government back.
It's a long emergency for many of us, but it is an emergency.
To help fix our broken housing market.
You can't help but notice that things are going very wrong in this place. No matter how much fun you are having, a glance at a newspaper will show you that it's possible to have no fun at all. And everyone seems to have a run of bad luck in the end. Now, it's hard not to see the absurdity of the situation. You unwrap your shiny new iPad, upon which you hope to squander an unconscionable amount of time and attention, only to discover, perhaps on the iPad itself, that the people who built this gorgeous device live lives of such unendurable drudgery that they regularly hurl themselves off the rooftops at the factory where they work. Nets have been installed to catch their falling bodies.
In return,
is there any sense to be made of disparities in luck of this kind?
And to renew the British dream for a
religion
new generation of
makes sense of it.
We must also
it's my karma. It's God's will that I'm so lucky. If God had wanted me to do dangerous and deadly boring work for a few dollars a day, that's what I would be doing. But as it happens, He wants me to have a new iPad. Hallelujah.
And it's why we want everyone to have the opportunity to benefit from studying more after they leave school. Because it's good for them and good for the
country. To not believe in God is to have no recourse to those illusions. To not believe in God is to know that it falls to us to make the world a better place.
So we have listened and we have learned. So we will undertake a major review.
We have barely emerged from centuries of barbarism. It's not a surprise that there are shocking inequities in this world. It is hard work to climb down out of the trees, walk upright, and build a viable global civilization. When you start with technology that's made of rocks and sticks and fur, this is a project, and progress is difficult. Just picture going back 100 generations within your own family. Just picture it kind of mapped onto this room, maybe this front row. Just 100 people. Your father's fathers, mother's fathers, mother's fathers, fathers, on back. I don't care how cultured you are, how well-educated your family. You can be Matthew Chapman, whose great-great-grandfather was Charles Darwin. But if you just keep going, in no more than 100 conversations, you are going to meet someone who thinks that sacrificing your firstborn child just might be a good way to control the weather.
That's why next week.
Some of you probably don't have to go back quite that far.
to put a price cap on energy.
You just have to go home for Christmas.
Meeting our manifesto promise and bring an end to rip-off energy prices once and for all.
So real progress is a very recent phenomenon. And as you know, religion generally keeps its foot on the brake. See, in the United States, we still have to argue about contraception, about whether women should have access to birth control.
The British dream.
Forget about abortion. Contraception is still something we're fighting for.
For a country that's divided can never
the Catholic Church, one of the richest institutions on earth, will oppose contraception with its last breath. And in so doing, it imagines it's exercising the most finely calibrated morality the earth has ever seen, all the while nurturing an army of child rapists and protecting them from secular justice and shuttling them from parish to parish so they can find fresh victims. And threatening these victims with endless litigation in this life and hellfire in the next. The misuse of human energy, the needless manufacturing of unhappiness, just boggles the mind. So moral and political progress is difficult, even in rich nations where there should be nothing but progress. But most of us know that no matter how much progress we make,
people from all over
it's very unlikely we're going to make this world a paradise.
Proud to call themselves British.
We're not going to truly make it invulnerable to insult and injury and death. Now, it's true there are a few serious people who think that we might cure all disease and even aging itself, or upload our consciousnesses onto some perfected AI, artificial intelligence. I think when you look closely at those efforts, it begins to look like science-enabled religion at this point. I'm sure there are fans of the singularity here, but I don't expect to have my consciousness backed up on the iPad 25.
And wasn't it a brilliant result?
I'll be happy to be proven wrong, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So I think it's safe to say that the reality of death is something we're all going to have to face, and the loss of those we love.
Quite simply, we are stronger.
There's no perfecting this place. Even if you play your game perfectly, and you become as healthy as a vampire, if you just live long enough, you are going to witness the death of everyone you love. At a certain point, the phone is just going to start ringing with bad news.
Because people are fed up with the gameplay.
Even our memories are precarious. My daughter is 3.5 years old, and I'm astonished at how much of her life I've forgotten. To see a video of her taken a year ago is to be astonished at how unfamiliar it is. She's a completely different person now. So there's no satisfying way to hold on to the past. In fact, when we look closely, there's no unsatisfying way of doing it either. We are locked in the present moment. A memory is a thought arising in the present. We are locked in the present moment with our thoughts and our iPads.
There's a big problem in our politics.
So what does atheism have to offer people in this circumstance? People like ourselves, and people more fearful and self-deceived than us. That great body of humanity that recoils at the mere suggestion that a first-century carpenter may not be able to hear their thoughts, much less answer their prayers.
One of our two great political parties is so riven with the
well, atheism as mere disbelief in God doesn't have much to offer. It's a corrective to a whole raft of bad ideas, but it doesn't put anything in place of bad ideas. It's a necessary corrective, but what fills the void is science and art and philosophy.
Always stamp it out.
Atheism is just a way of clearing the space for better conversations. And the problem we face, of course, is a problem of convincing the better part of humanity to have those better conversations. And this is a political problem. It's a scientific problem. It's an interpersonal problem. It's a problem of education.
Because 4 months ago, This city came under attack from those who
But the problem is that most people, most of the time, are desperate to believe ridiculous and divisive ideas for patently emotional reasons.
Accepting and tolerant of others. The fact that
and while rarely explicit, what they're really worried about is death.
The way we encourage people from all backgrounds.
When we're arguing about teaching evolution in the schools, I would argue that we are really arguing about death. But it seems to me the only reason why any religious person cares about evolution is because if their holy books are wrong about our origins, they're very likely wrong about our destiny after death. So when you say to someone that you're a fool for not believing in evolution or a fool to think the universe is 6,000 years old, I think that gets translated as you're a fool to think that your daughter who died in a car accident is really in heaven with God. And that is a very different communication. Before I get to the end of this sentence, something unforeseen and terrible will happen to somebody somewhere. And we will read about it in the newspaper tomorrow.
On the Manchester Arena.
The question is, how can people close to these tragedies make sense of them? And religion provides an answer for that. It's an unjustified answer. It's a bad answer. It's an answer that comes with a host of other liabilities because one being that it has birthed
people throwing open their doors
many competing and irreconcilable answers, and therefore religious conflict and political tribalism seem impossible to overcome.
Helping people get home safely.
But religion does provide an answer that most people think they need.
Ordinary people rushing to the
and the schism among secularists, the fact that so many people at this conference are regularly attacked for criticizing religion, follows from this point. And people are worried about the grief of other people. The scientists and journalists who have made a career out of attacking the so-called new atheists are worried about the grief of other people.
Men and women, young and old,
if your child dies in a car accident,
Hindu, Jew, standing together,
believing that she is now in heaven with Jesus,
image of this city
has to be consoling. It has to be consoling in a way that no other belief can be.
And strength.
It's true that there's a shadow side to this kind of thinking. I've heard from people who've suffered tragedies like this in the context of their faith, and found that the belief in an afterlife was actually a way for their friends not to connect with their grief. And in fact, to grieve too much in such a circumstance is tantamount to, it's a little embarrassing. It's a sign that you lack faith. I mean, what are you really grieving about? If you think that the one you love most in this world is now in a better place, and you're going to be rejoined with her in the twinkling of an eye.
And it's this heritage that means today we export.
But I think we can admit that atheism doesn't offer real consolation on this point.
It was here in Britain.
And that's not an accident. If you're open to new evidence, there's no guarantee that the revisions in your worldview are going to be consoling. You know, when you lose Santa Claus, what you get in his place is not as fun.
Back in the 1970s,
the sight of your parents maxing out their credit cards
invented the lithium-ion battery
and wrapping presents in their pajamas is not as consoling as the elves and the sleigh and the 8 tiny reindeer.
Funding new battery technologies for electric cars.
So when we think about what is lost,
technologies we will soon be
when we jettison religion, it's not the holidays and the architecture and the music and the humility and the awe and the profundity. All of that can be had very much within the purview of reason. And it can be had without lying to ourselves or to our children or to other people and their children about the nature of reality.
And
the thing that gets lost, the thing for which there is no real substitute, is total consolation in the face of death.
You were right to back it as part
and it seems to me if we want to build a bridge to a rational world
that
the better part of humanity can cross, we have to deal with this thing.
The future is bright, our potential.
Now, most of us do our best not to think about death. But there's always part of our minds that knows this can't go on forever. Part of us always knows that we're just a doctor's visit away or a phone call away from being starkly reminded with the fact of our own mortality.
And beyond the streets, corridors, and meeting rooms of Westminster.
Now, I'm sure many of you in this room have experienced this in some form. You must know how uncanny it is to suddenly be thrown out of the normal course of your life.
They want to know their job is going
and just be given the full-time job of not dying or caring for someone who is.
The school their children go to is the best.
Hitch wrote brilliantly about this in Vanity Fair, and I suggest you read his articles if you haven't.
Safety as they advance towards old age.
But the one thing people tend to realize at moments like this is that they wasted a lot of time when life was normal.
To lead happy,
it's not just what they did with their time. It's not just that they spent too much time working or compulsively checking email.
These are the priorities.
It's that they cared about the wrong things. They regret what they cared about.
People up and down this land. And
their attention was bound up in petty concerns.
Not worrying
year after year
our job security,
when life was normal.
But theirs. Not addressing
and this is a paradox, of course, because we all know this epiphany is coming.
That concern them.
Don't you know this is coming?
On our future.
Don't you know that there's going to come a day when you'll be sick or someone close to you will die, and you'll look back on the kinds of things that captured your attention,
to make a difference, to change things for the better, to hand on to the next generation.
You know this, and yet if you're like most people,
fairer and more
you'll spend most of your time in life
and to renew the British dream for a new generation.
Tacitly presuming you'll live forever.
None of this will be easy.
Watching a bad movie for the fourth time.
There will be obstacles and barriers along the way.
Or bickering with your spouse. These things only make sense in light of eternity.
The face of difficulty,
there better be a heaven if we're going to waste our time like that.
The test of a leader is how you respond when tough times come upon you. When faced...
So unlike religious people, we atheists really have a good reason to make the most of life. To make the most of the present moment. Because even if you live to be 100, there's just not that many days in life.
When confronted with adversity, if you find the will to pull through. And it's when tested the most.
So what is the point of life?
Within ourselves.
Is anything sacred?
To rise to the challenge
does such a question even make sense?
This
is what religious people are worried about. And I think these questions do make sense, and there are answers to them. But the answers are not a matter of getting more information.
As we turn to face the future.
The answer is a change in attitude.
So let us go forward.
There are ways of experiencing life as sacred.
Values, clear
without believing anything, and certainly without believing anything on insufficient evidence.
With a rich,
there are ways to
follow,
really live in the present
moment. A bold,
moment.
exciting mission to pursue. Let us fulfill
what's the
our
alternative?
Duty to the British people. Let us fulfill our duty
is always
to our
now.
country. Let us fulfill our duty to Britain.
However much you feel you may need to plan for the future, to anticipate it, to mitigate risks, the reality of your life is now. Now, this may sound trite. This may sound perilously close to what Dan called deepity in his talk. But it's the truth. It's not quite true as a matter of physics. In fact, there is no now that encompasses the entire universe. You can't talk about an event being simultaneously occurring here and one at the same moment occurring in Andromeda. The truth is that now is not even well defined as a matter of neurology, because we know that inputs to the brain come at different moments, and that consciousness is built upon layers of inputs whose timings have to be different. So you just consider the sensation of touching your finger to your nose. It seems simultaneous as a matter of conscious experience. But we know that the input from the finger to sensory cortex must take longer than the input from your nose. And this is true no matter how short your arms or long your nose. So the brain buffers these inputs in some way in memory, and then promotes the seeming simultaneity to consciousness. And so our conscious awareness of the present moment is, in some relevant sense, already a memory. But as a matter of conscious experience, the reality of your life is always now. And I think this is a liberating truth about the nature of the human mind. In fact, I think there's probably nothing more important to understand about your mind than that, if you want to be happy in this world. But the past is a memory. It's a thought arising in the present. The future is merely anticipated. It is another thought arising now.
Mr. Speaker, the Pope
what we truly have is this moment and this. And we spend most of our lives forgetting this truth, repudiating it, fleeing it, overlooking it. And the horror is that we succeed. We manage to never really connect with the present moment and find fulfillment there because we are continually hoping to become happy in the future. And the future never arrives. Even when we think we're in the present moment, we're in very subtle ways always looking over its shoulder, anticipating what's coming next. We're always solving a problem. And it's possible to simply drop your problem, if only for a moment, and enjoy whatever is true of your life in the present. Now, again, as you can see, the line between timeless wisdom and banality is a little difficult to find. And I'm a little worried that some of you have begun to gag on what seems like New Age pablum. And you must know that I don't want to stand in front of 4,000 atheists and do my best impression of Lao Tzu. But if I'm going to talk about this crucial point, I do have to say a few things that you've probably heard before and probably dismissed because it came bundled with religious metaphysics and superstition.
Of the high privilege and distinct honor.
This is not a matter of new information
Pope Francis of the Holy See.
Or more information. It requires a change in attitude. It requires a change in the attentiveness you pay to your experience in the present moment. Now, of course, when we talk about conscious experience, we're once again talking about death, because if consciousness is just arising, dependent upon the brain, then death is real, and every religion ever devised is false. And needless to say, most people are walking around with an intuition that that's not true, that consciousness is in some sense independent of the body. Now, there are very good reasons to doubt that intuition, of course. We know that introspection offers us a very poor view of the material basis of our inner lives.
I am most grateful for the invitation.
There are 100 billion neurons in the brain. There are more, each making thousands of connections to other cells. There are more connections in a single cubic centimeter of brain tissue than stars in our galaxy. And yet our inner experience offers absolutely no clue that this is the case. And so we're not just slightly out of touch with the material basis of our inner lives. We're completely out of touch with it. I mean, I actually think about the human brain a fair amount, but it almost never occurs to me that I actually have one.
I would like to think that the reason for
so we have a very limited view of what's going on. We're subjectively unaware of most of what our minds are doing. And yet when we think about what matters is consciousness and its contents. Consciousness is everything. Our experience of the world, the experience of those we care about, is a matter of consciousness and its contents. So whatever the origins of consciousness, the most important question for us is how can we truly be fulfilled in life? How can we create lives that are truly worth living, given that these lives come to an end? We're all in the business of seeking fulfillment and relief from suffering. I mean, this is not to say that we want mere pleasure or the easiest possible life. Much of what we want in life, much of what we want to experience, entails struggle, and many of us learn to enjoy the struggle itself in some measure. Any athlete knows that there's certain kinds of pain that are actually pleasurable. If the burn of lifting weights was actually the symptom of a disease, it would be intolerable. But because it's happening in the context of a strenuous exercise and progress there, most people learn to enjoy it. So the conceptual lens through which we view even very intense sensation largely determines how we feel about it. And this is one of the many ways in which our thinking about experience changes the character of experience. So the frame we put around the present moment is important and largely determines our experience of it. But it seems possible, in fact, to experience life more nakedly than this, to experience it without an obvious frame, to pay attention to the present moment closely enough so that you're not doing anything to it. And there are techniques for doing this. So I want to try a little experiment with you. Please close your eyes. And you might want to adjust your posture so that you're comfortable sitting.
And the people of Israel symbolizes the need
and just feel yourself sitting there in your seat.
The sense of unity by means of just
take a few deep breaths.
On the other,
and just let gravity settle you in your seat.
Directly to God.
And you can let your breath just come and go naturally.
To the transcendent dignity of the human being.
Become aware of this sensation of sitting. Feel the weight of your body.
Moses.
Feel the weight of your arms and shoulders.
With a good
feel your back and your legs against the seat.
You are asked to protect by means of the law.
And just notice your body however it appears, whatever sensations you notice. Sensations of pressure or vibration or warmth, tension, aching, whatever
I would like not
arises.
Only to address you, but
try to feel this as closely as possible.
The entire people of the United States, here together with the representatives, I would like
now gradually become aware of the sensation of breathing, wherever you happen to feel it, either at the tip of the nose or the rising and falling of your chest or the rising and falling of your abdomen. Just pay attention to the sensations associated with each inhalation and each exhalation.
To save money and one step at a time to build a better life.
There's no need to control the breath, just let it come and go.
These are men and women who are not concerned.
See if you can feel the next inhalation from the moment it arises. And just cover it until the moment it stops.
Sustain the life of society.
And do the same with your exhalation.
They generate solidarity by their actions, and they
listen to the sounds in the room.
Organizations which offer a helping hand.
Just let your mind now be the open space in which sounds and sensations arise.
I would also like to enter into dialogue with the many elderly persons.
Now, you don't need to make any heroic effort to focus. Just notice what you notice. Notice everything that you notice arises spontaneously.
In many ways,
You don't have to move toward it. Just relax and notice the next sensation, the next sound.
I know that many of them are retired, but still active. They keep walking to build up.
Now see if you can pay even closer attention. There's a layer of concepts here that you can get behind. For instance, feel the sensations in your hands. If you really pay attention, you will see that you don't actually feel their shape. That you have a mental image of your hands. But if you pay close attention, you will feel just the raw sensations of tingling, vibration, pressure, a much more diffuse cloud of sensations. So see if you can feel your hands closely enough to relinquish their shape.
Of many others. I wish to dialogue with all of you, and I
so too with the rest of your body.
To do so through the historical.
See if you can just let it dissolve into a cloud of sensation. Just be the space in which each new raw sensation arises.
When men and women of goodwill are marking the anniversaries of several great Americans.
Feel the sensations of your face and head.
Of history, at the reality of human weakness.
Now you might feel that your consciousness is in your head or behind your face. But as a matter of experience, these are just more sensations arising in consciousness. The only evidence of your face and head is a sensation arising in consciousness at this moment.
Their lives to build a better future. They shaped fundamental values which endure forever in the spirit of the American people.
Now, notice what sort of mood you are in. If you feel restless or bored, take that constellation of energy itself as an object of consciousness.
By always finding
you feel these states of mind, however they appear in the body.
And to do so with
if you're sleepy, notice that feeling, whether there's a pattern of sensation on your face, in the eyes.
And interpreting reality. In harmony.
So sounds and sensations and feelings are just announcing this open space of consciousness.
Conflicts and in the here and now of each.
Now you may notice as you try to pay attention to raw sensation that thoughts continually intrude. You find yourself thinking without knowing that you were thinking. That the moment you notice that, the moment you notice a thought in the mind, take that as an object of consciousness. Just watch it, if it's a visual image, or if there's language, and then come back to sensations and sounds. We're just going to do this for a few more moments, so allow yourself to begin again, as though for the first time. If you just feel the next breath.
President Abraham Lincoln, the guardian of liberty, who labored tirelessly that this nation under God might have a new birth.
Okay, so now you can open your eyes.
Building a future of freedom.
Now, it's easy to feel when you open your eyes that something has fundamentally changed. You know, a moment ago you seemed to be in your head, focusing on your inner experience, but now you open your eyes and you're out in the world again. But nothing has fundamentally changed.
By the disturbing social
the world you see with your open eyes is in the same place you were with your eyes closed. This is consciousness. Okay, I'm not saying the world isn't real, but as a matter of your experience, it's more accurate to say that I and everyone here are in your consciousness than that your consciousness is in this room. It's a matter of experience. Here's one way you can see that. Just visualize a diamond this size between my two hands. You just project it there. Now, depending on your powers of visualization, I should appear to be very, very rich. Even if you're bad at this, you probably can project something. Something changes when I ask you to do this. Change it to a tomato. Can I see a show of hands? How many people have something change as a visual percept when you project here? How many of you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about? Okay. I am in your brain right now. Okay, everyone here is in your brain. Because I am pinching your brain. This is consciousness pinching consciousness. Whatever you can possibly notice in your body, in your mind, in the world, has only one place to appear: in your conscious experience. Now, I'm not saying this is all just a dream, but as a neurological matter, it is very much like a dream. It is a dream that is constrained by inputs from the external world. And the dreams we call dreams at night are dreams that are not constrained by the external world. And that's why you seem to be able to get away with everything. But your mind is all you have. It's all you've ever had. It's all you have to offer other people. And this might sound callous to say when there may be many other aspects of your life that seem in need of being addressed. When you're struggling to find a career or you're sick, but it's still true. If you're perpetually angry and depressed and confused and unloving, it doesn't matter how much success you have or who is in your life, you're not going to enjoy any of it. I suspect you could all make a list of things you want to accomplish, of things that really need to be changed about your life. What is the significance of everything on that list? Each thing on that list seems to promise that if you could only do it, you would have reason to just be happy in the present moment. We are all trying to find a path back to the present moment, and good enough reason to just be happy here. And the practice of meditation I just showed you, often called mindfulness meditation, is just a trick for doing that. It's a trick for setting aside your to-do list, if only for a few moments, and actually locate a feeling of fulfillment in the present. Even in the developed. And again, I'm not saying that everything on your list is absurd or not worth accomplishing. But how dissatisfied with the present do you have to be in order to prepare a satisfying future? How neurotic do you have to be? How unhappy do you have to be? How much stress do you have to feel? How unpleasant do you have to be for other people to be around? If you're constantly ruminating about what you just did or what you should have done or what you would have done if you only had the chance, you will miss your life. You'll fail to connect with it. You'll fail to connect with other people. When other people talk, you'll be waiting for them to shut up so that you can say what's on your mind to say. Even when you don't have an opportunity to talk, in a moment like this, when you just need to listen, the challenges facing the conversation as an automaticity continues. You have a voice in your head that keeps saying things. Haven't you noticed? The conversation we have with ourselves every minute of the day comes at a cost. I'm not saying that discursive thought is not necessary or useful, but it is the mechanism by which most of our suffering is inflicted, the sorrow and the self-doubt and the anxiety and the fear, and yes, the fear of death. Thinking is useful, but being perpetually lost in thought isn't. Being the mere hostage of the next thought that comes careening into consciousness isn't useful. So if there's an antidote to the fear of death and the experience of loss that's compatible with reason, I think it's to be found here. The purpose of life is pretty obvious. We are constantly... I mean, why do we create culture and form relationships? Beyond matters of mere survival. We are constantly trying to create and repair a world that our minds want to be in. And we, alone among humanity, for the most part, have realized that religion is a bad way to do that. So we have to start a new conversation. Thank you very much.
New global forms of slavery, born of great injustices. It can be overcome only
Yep, the time for questions. I told you he was a Jedi. Up the top there, above the exit sign, man in a white shirt.
Hello. I'd like your response to a sort of a middle way I've been trying to convince people about. Middle way between death as the end and your iPad 2.25 consciousness upload idea. So we don't have that iPad 25, but we do have 4,000 consciousness simulators here. Tomorrow or this afternoon, we're going to be simulating the sort of hitch processes, various of them on a distributed system. Now, it's not embodied and it's not as consoling as having him around, but it's real in some sense, and it's active, and in some sort of weak way, we are keeping part of that consciousness going. It also sort of demands our attention and effort to do, and it also sort of means...
I fear that I missed a few crucial nouns in what has already been said, so
I'm sorry, I've got a cold, so I think it's going on. All right,
so as a question, please.
The question is, can we act as this iPad 25 for people who've died?
Right.
A kind of mimetic afterlife.
I believe I understand that question. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Douglas Hofstadter thinks that's the case, that it's possible to have so fully imbibed another person's consciousness, that their thoughts, their way of thinking, that your memory of them is kind of an emulation of them, and that suggests a kind of a way of thinking about their continuing. That doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work. It's not going to work for the rest of humanity that really care about the difference between getting a dial tone at death and having an experience. I mean, it's there are many paradoxes that arise here when you think about copying, really copying a human mind, and it's very difficult to think of what it would mean if we actually could back ourselves up. But the idea that somehow everyone's memory of us is a way of living on in the relevant sense, I don't think it is. It's important. I mean, I think it's nice to think about how one's influence in the world propagates and how people live on in that sense. But it's not living on in the sense that people, I think, really care about.
Yep, there's a question down here on the floor.
G'day,
Just near the door. Just near the door. Just near the door.
G'day, Sam. Hi. Thanks, first of all. Just because a fairly broad question, but I'm just wondering what your opinions on DMT are, and well, I don't know how much you know. I assume you know more than me, but perhaps maybe if it's found naturally in the human brain, perhaps why, or if there's anything you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, well, I'm unqualified to talk about it because I haven't done it. I mean, for those of you who don't know, DMT is famous as the most potent psychedelic in the sense that it's not in terms of the size of the dose required to get you off, but the effects of taking it. And it also distinguishes itself because it's the shortest acting, and it is an endogenous molecule that we already have in our brains and elsewhere, and so in some sense this is an illegal neurotransmitter that people can it becomes available when you smoke it or inject it, and it leads to the shortest and yet most stratospheric change in consciousness. So a whole an acid trip could be, an LSD trip could be 10 hours. DMT could be 10 minutes, full course. And the phenomenology of this experience is interesting because it's not like it's you with a changed perception. What people tend to report if they get a sufficient amount of DMT on board, and apparently that's hard because it's very unpleasant to smoke, but they report getting kind of shot out of themselves and landing elsewhere. And the phenomenology of this experience there's almost no classical religious imagery at all. No matter who you are taking this drug, you don't meet Jesus, and you don't meet your grandma, and you don't meet Buddha. But what people tend to report is very bizarre, alien, insectile-like creatures that they come into the presence of. So there's this, probably what I just said sounds like complete insanity to most people in this room, but you go online and you get smart, serious people trying to make sense of this phenomenology. But I've never done it, and so I can't speak as one who has had to integrate that experience.
One more question. Up the top here above the exit signs.
Hi, Sam. As an atheist, I have really started valuing life, and the dignity of life. But the problem is that now when I hear of any loss of life which has happened due to some deliberate actions of others or due to some carelessness of others, it saddens me, it grieves, makes me angry, because earlier I used to just feel, oh, accident happened because it just had to happen, and it happened. But now I can see the responsibility of other people, that others are being robbed of their right to live. And so how do I deal with this, like this anger, this grief, me or other atheists like me who can clearly see the responsibilities of others?
Right.
I've led to travel north in search of a better life.
Well, as I said, this
and for the loved ones.
The change in attitude that I just recommended, I kind of smuggled mindfulness meditation into this talk and foisted it on 4,000 atheists. So you're now all Buddhists. I'm sorry to have done that to you. But it is an antidote to that kind of suffering. I mean, when you look closely at the mechanics of your own suffering, you find that when you're suffering, you are lost in thought. Now, that may seem like the pushback you immediately get from that is that, well, some things are worth suffering over. You mean to tell me that, my child dies and I could stop suffering if I just, break the spell of thought? Yes, to some degree. I mean, but it's damn hard to do when the bar is set that high, when you're dealing with the death of someone close to you. But it is the experience so the thing you just did for 5 minutes is something that I have done. I've gone on retreat for weeks and months at a time, and in silence for 18 hours a day, just did that exercise. And so the it takes a long time to realize how much thought is clouding your experience of the present moment, and how much it's how much of our mediocrity and how we feel moment to moment is just a matter of us continually thinking, this undercurrent of thought. And so when something terrible happens, the undercurrent of your thought is all of these kind of grief-stricken ideas. I'll never see her again. The memory of how much you loved her, back and forth, and you're buffeted by thought ceaselessly. And for most of us, there is no alternative but we're just hostage to the contents of the next thought. And if there's relief to be found in the face of death and loss, the relief is to bear down upon the present moment and become interested enough in the present moment so that you can notice that to some degree consciousness is equanimous even in the presence of that kind of emotional pain. And it does, and then it does erode the pain of that pain. And again, to some degree, it's a kind of framing issue. It's the difference between thinking that the pain in your arm is because you're now getting so good at lifting weights, or thinking that it's because you've got bone cancer. It could be the exact same sensation, but that the framing is the difference is total. And so what I'm recommending to you is many good things come from training. We give no thought to training the mind. We give a lot of thought to training our body. We give a lot of thought to training to physical health. We give a lot of thought to getting more information, education, understanding more about the world, more facts. We give very little thought to training attention itself. And one of the dividends paid, and there's a fair amount of neuroscientific research on this point, on specifically the point of mindfulness meditation, is that emotional self-regulation and many cognitive improvements, many good things happen when you can actually just drop your stress and the automaticity of thinking for a moment and just be aware of the next sensation, the next thought, the next moment of a mood. And there's just our experience as a flow in the present moment, and there's relief to be found there, but it can be kind of hard won. It takes training. It takes a commitment to not merely brooding and thinking. And that's again, and I'm not discounting the utility of thought, and I'm not discounting the importance of sorting out the world. There's a quietistic bias among meditators that I think is completely dysfunctional. And we don't want a culture of people who are not engaged and not trying to improve the world. But if there's any kernel of truth in the religions we so deplore, and they are just a carnival of errors, the truth is that it's possible to sink into the present moment in such a way as to find it sacred and to cease to have a problem. And that's just a fact for which there's so much testimony, and unfortunately most of the testimony is contaminated with religious bullshit. So, that's everything.
Not only do I support her, but I also offer encouragement to all those who are convinced that a just and necessary punishment must never exclude the dimension of hope and the goal of rehabilitation. In these times, when social concerns are so important, I cannot fail to mention the servant of God, Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Worker Movement. Her social activism, her passion for justice and for the cause of the oppressed were inspired by the gospel, her faith, and the example of the saints. how much progress has been made in this area in so many parts of the world. How much has been done in these first years of the third millennium to raise people out of extreme poverty. I know that you share my conviction that much more still needs to be done, and in times of crisis and economic hardship, a spirit of global solidarity must not be lost. At the same time, I would encourage you to keep in mind all those people around us who are trapped in a cycle of poverty. They too need to be given hope. The fight against poverty and hunger must be fought constantly and on many fronts, especially in its cause. I know that many Americans today, as in the past, are working to deal with this problem. It goes without saying that part of this great effort is the creation and distribution of wealth. The right use of natural resources, the proper application of technology, and the harnessing of the spirit of enterprise are essential elements of an economy which seeks to be modern, inclusive, and sustainable. Business is a noble vocation directed to producing wealth and improving the world. It can be a fruitful source of prosperity from the area in which it operates, especially if it sees the creation of jobs as an essential part of its service to the common good. This common good also includes the earth, a central theme of the encyclical, which I recently wrote in order to enter into the dialogue with all people about our common home. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all. In Laudato Si, I call for a courageous and responsible effort to redirect our steps and to avert the most serious effects of the environmental deterioration caused by human activity. I'm convinced that we can make a difference, I'm sure. I have no doubt that the United States and this Congress have an important role to play. Now is the time for courageous action and strategies aimed at implementing a culture of care and an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. We have the freedom needed to limit and direct technology, to devise intelligent ways of developing and limiting our power, and to put technology at the service of another type of progress, one which is here, more human, more social, more integral. In this regard, I am confident that America's outstanding academic and research institutions can make a vital contribution in the years ahead. A century ago, at the beginning of the Great War, which Pope Benedict XV termed a pointless slaughter, another notable American was born, the Cistercian monk Thomas Merton. He remains a source of a spiritual inspiration and guide for many people. In his autobiography, Merton wrote, "I came into the world free by nature, in the image of God. I was, nevertheless, the prisoner of my own violence, my own selfishness, in the image of the world into which I was born." That world was the picture of hell, full of men like myself, loving God and yet hating Him, born to love Him, living instead in fear of hopeless self-contradictory hungers. Merton was, above all, a man of prayer, a thinker who challenged the certitudes of this time and opened new horizons for souls and for the Church. He was also a man of dialogue, a promoter of peace between peoples and religions. From this perspective of dialogue, I would like to recognize the efforts made in recent months to help overcome historic differences linked to painful episodes of the past. It is my duty to build bridges and to help all men and women in any way possible to do the same. When countries which have been at odds resume the path of the dialogue, a dialogue which may have been interrupted for the most legitimate of reasons, new opportunities open up for all. This that required and requires courage and daring, which is not the same as irresponsibility. A good political leader is one who, with the interest of all in mind, seizes the moment in a spirit of openness and pragmatism. A good political leader always opts to initiate processes rather than possessing space. Being at the service of dialogue and peace also means being truly determined to minimize and in the long term to end the many armed conflicts throughout our world. Here we have to ask ourselves, why are deadly weapons being sold to those who plan to inflict untold suffering on individuals and society? Sadly, the answer, as we all know, is simply for money. Money that is drenched in blood, often innocent blood. In the face of the shameful and culpable silence, it is our duty to confront the problem and to stop the arms trade. Three sons and one daughter of this land, 4 individuals have 4 dreams. Lincoln, liberty. Martin Luther King, liberty in plurality and non-exclusion. Dorothy Day, social justice and the rights of persons. And Thomas Merton, the capacity for dialogue and openness to God. 4 representatives of American people. I will end my visit to your country in Philadelphia, where I will take part in the World Meeting of Families. It is my wish that throughout our visit, the family should be a recurrent theme. How essential the family has been to the building of this country. And how worthy it remains for our support and encouragement. Yet, I cannot hide my concern for the family, which is threatened, perhaps as never before, from within and without. Fundamental relations are being called into question, as is the very basis of marriage and the family. I can only reiterate the importance and above all, the richness and the beauty of family life. In particular, I would like to call attention to those family members who are the most vulnerable, the young. For many of them, a future filled with countless possibilities beckons. Yet so many others seem disoriented and aimless, trapped in a hopeless maze of violence, abuse, and despair. Their problems are our problems. We cannot avoid them. We need to face them together, to talk about them, and to seek effective solutions rather than getting bogged down in discussion. At the risk of oversimplifying, we might say that we live in a culture with precious young people known to start a family because they lack possibilities for the future. Yet, the same culture presents others with so many options that they too are dissuaded from starting a family. A nation can be considered great when it defends liberty, as Lincoln did, when it fosters a culture which enables people to dream of full rights for all brothers and sisters, as Martin Luther King sought to do, when it strives for justice and the cause of the oppressed, as Dorothy Day did by her tireless work, the fruit of a faith which becomes dialogue and sows peace in the contemplative style of Thomas Merton. In this remark, I have sought to present some of the richness of your cultural heritage, of the spirit of the American people. It is my desire that this spirit continue to develop and grow so that as many young people as possible can inherit and dwell in a land which has inspired so many people to dream. God bless America.